provision that if new standards do become available, that we have the ability to approve those or not approve them, so that we keep that standard in the system.
Okay.
And getting back to a concept I know that we discussed in this forum as well, with the expiration of, say flour, the date that was chosen for 1 year. If we were coming up to a point where we were about to make that year expiration, reach that year expiration, is it possible that then that too could be repurposed and then extracted and then retested and utilized, rather than causing the waste of just destroying that product?
The expiration rule, coming up off the top of my head, is 1 year from harvest for plant material, 1 year from manufacture for products. And the rest of the rules are silent on treatment of that.
So does that mean it could be repurposed? Yeah.
Currently, it's not addressed, so yes, it could be.
Thank you.
I wanted that, Ted, brings me back to another point on timing. Is there anything in the rule that compels the lab to turn these samples in a timely fashion, or are the downstream folks at the mercy of their own time to get the product into supply stream?
I mean, the goal is quality of the returned product, right, in the analysis, but it's in their best interest because these will be private labs after the first year.
Right.
It's in their best interest to have a process where they're not only turning over quality results, but also timely. And if they're not, there's nothing requiring a cultivator to go to that lab. So they would just be passed on to a more efficient operator.
Okay. 2-05, I think sorry, yes, sorry, Michael, go ahead.
I can give you some. Is it anticipated that these labs will be labs that are running other types of tests as well, or will these be established solely for the purpose of marijuana?
It's a great question. I think it's something we need to account for in the rule in terms of the standards and how everything will be sectioned off. So if you recall in the cultivator and processor rules, there have to be access restrictions to certain areas. It may be in our best interest to have the equipment and where these tests are being performed in a separate area for the tests. But to be honest with you, that's the first time I've heard that question, so I think it's a great one and something we can share with our consultant and look at the rest of our rules. Thank you.
Other thoughts? 2-05, reporting. I think we just came out of that rule. 2-06, waste disposal. And 2-07, security. Again, I think these mirror prior rules that we've seen.
A question,
John.
On the security, based on how Ohio law enforcement is, small agencies, part-time agencies, full-time, when it says contact, I think it said either or.
Law enforcement?
Yeah, my recommendation based on that is to contact both the policing entity that have jurisdiction over that, as well as the sheriff's office, because of part-time, full-time, and then the second part of that is, if it's a smaller community and there's an alarm drop or something there, they may be going right by there anyway. So I would recommend you contact both. Okay. And then let them decide how they're going to handle it. The other thing on security, I noticed when I was in Colorado, there were a lot of product on Craigslist, you know, for sale. And so when you think about disposal, you know, like every industry has a certain amount of shortage, if you will, shrinkage. I'm not smart enough to figure out how to do that, but that was going on and it was alive and well out there.
Yeah, your concern is what's actually being disposed is being
Correct.
Taken and sold on. Yeah. We have a couple of different restrictions. I think that concern is greater at the cultivator level. With these labs, most of the sample, the goal is to have it be used. And once that sample is performed, it's rendered useless just by way of the analysis. So I think there's less concern here, but you bring a good point up for cultivators. And we have the security requirements. We have that any of the containers must be locked. We have that they have to be fenced in a well-lit area. So I see your concern. I think we took some steps previously to address that, but certainly something to keep an eye out on.
I think from the law enforcement perspective is when you look at those social networks and social communications, it would be real easy to follow that back.
Yeah.
You know, about a rookie detective could figure that out in about 15 minutes. It got from here to here to there.
Yeah.
Question on, you talked about the security equipment being able to produce format that can be stored. But does the rule talk about how long those records have to be stored?
It does. For the video surveillance,
Yes.
45 days.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else on surveillance? 208, prohibited activities. 209, record-keeping requirements. Moving into enforcement, 3-01. Again, I think it's pretty much a repeat of the rule we've seen before, just to refresh everybody. And then fees.
I want to go back to the top.
Okay.
The most fundamental thing to have a better understanding of the number of labs and the what we need or what we think we need, what we possibly will have for them to be profitable enough to stay in business to keep this whole business moving. Could you share a little more about what we think?
You know, as far as the number, and it's a great question, Nancy. It's something we thought about with cultivators and processors. With cultivators, obviously, we have that ceiling. With processors, we also have that ceiling. And so I think that's the license requirement that we need. And so it's not necessary to have one for the testing labs. It's why we did not include that. So
I'm worried about a minimum.
Right.
Will we have a minimum?
Right.
I can't, you know, I have 30 years in a public higher ed institution, and I can't imagine the expense required for them to go into business for 1 year and then to have it all taken away to the private sector, if I understand this correctly. And
no, it just says that a private lab 1 year after will begin operating. It doesn't say that the.
But what is the what for the university? What is the benefit for them? I mean, I would think it's all expense for them in a time when higher education has no budget.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I was just asking about it.
Well, and that's one of the main reasons why
understand it better.
we drafted it the way that we did. You know, they've expressed some of those concerns in our conversations. We drafted it this way, understanding, like you said, a minimum. You know, we need to know at least that we're going to have a set number of labs doing this analysis. Just because this plant material can't go anywhere to the dispensaries until it's tested. I know we'll have private labs that want to operate in the state. And then it'll be up to the applicants to think, okay, based on the number of cultivators, the number of processors, does it make sense to apply? So the market will kind of help regulate it so that there aren't too many labs operating. But we know there will be a minimum number just because that is the final gatekeeper to getting the products and the plant material to the dispensary. So I see your concern with public institutions.
That first year
there.
is my concern.
It's there.
The concern is there, or the?
No, I see your concern, and we've talked with the about some of these things.
So do I understand it that the universities for the university labs for the first year would be following all these rules and following all these functions?
That's correct.
They would need to be compliant with all of this.
Yep.
And then after 12 months,
They could still operate.
well,
Yes,
they can still be in the
operate.
business.
That's correct. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And they still can benefit then as being a source of revenue for that lab.
They elected to participate in this, and they were voted around, there's nothing to prevent them from continuing to operate.
That wasn't, I didn't understand that. Thank you.
I think to Michael's comment earlier, if it's an incremental add to their existing lab business, some of the infrastructure may exist already, because we'll have to see how that pans out, but I could see a case where this is just an added profile or an added panel to a lab that's already doing business, but
Added profile, but with all these restrictions of keeping it separate and
security, I have no knowledge of labs, but I believe that a lot of these standards are probably standard in the industry. Yeah, as opposed to this is all new standards for marijuana. I don't think that's quite
well,
the case.
medical labs, a little familiarity, and they have a tremendous amount of regulation. But that's why I was concerned to set a university lab up for 1 year to be the,
guinea pig, right?
well, something, I don't know how to
Stay in
say it
business.
better.
Yeah.
They can stay in business and,
I would imagine that part of the calculation on the part of those public institutions will be to determine if this is an adjunct to what they're already doing, as opposed to establishing a brand new operation. I would imagine that that's part of the process that they will have to go through in determining whether or not they want to indeed enter into this business.
Maybe I missed it. I hear batch used a lot in here. Have we determined
For batch,
what a batch is?
yeah, in the definition section, so for plant material that's flowers and buds, it's 15 pounds. For plant material that's doesn't have the flower and buds, or not specifically flowers and buds, the trim is 25 pounds.
other thoughts? Or, oh, go ahead.
But again, and I think this is a point of clarifying, that raw material is generally, its only purpose is to be extracted, correct? So that's, I think, why I was a little bit confused why there's the distinction if it's not being tested before it's extracted. I mean, I don't think it's common practice for a dispensary to see trim being sold.
Right, right.
So that's why I was a little bit confused as to why the distinction is for batch related to that material if it's not being tested prior to being extracted.
We do have testing in between cultivator and processor, but it is only for basic potency and for pesticide and fertilizer contamination, under the auspices that after it is then manufactured, it will be subject to subsequent tests for residual solvents, mycotoxins, anything that could be concentrated during the extraction process.
Okay, good on that before we bring that to a close. Thanks to the Commerce team again.
Thank you.
We do have several program updates from both the Department of Commerce and the State Board of Pharmacy. And I'd like to invite Missy Braddock up to the table, and she is the interagency team coordinator, and she will take us through some updates for the committee. Okay.
We are slide ready.
We will take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back at 2 o'clock and see what Missy has for us.
Sweet dreams are made.